Yeah, just to summarize what Cecilia said, I am Barry Adams. I have been doing SEO for a very long time. I am a very old man. I specialize in technical SEO, and I work primarily with news publishers nowadays, with news websites. I have a newsletter, like Cecilia said, on SEOforGoogleNews.com, which I share tips and insights on optimizing news websites for Google. And those logos are some of the conferences I've spoken at, and I hope they will impress you if my talk does not do that. Let's talk about technical SEO. And first, I always like to define what technical SEO is so that we're all clear about it, because some people have different ideas about what is and is not technical SEO, which is fine. I'm just approaching this from what I think is technical SEO. And that relates to the three main processes that Google has as a search engine, which is crawling, indexing, and ranking. Crawling, of course, is the discovery mechanism by which Google finds new content to index. The indexer then indexes that content and makes sense of it and understands what it could rank for. And then the front end of Google is where Google shows that content to its users when people type in a search query. When I talk about technical SEO, I am primarily talking about optimizing for crawling and indexing. I am not talking about optimizing for ranking. So we are going to avoid talking about things like links, things about even basic content optimization, because I think that's more about ranking. This is all about, say, making sure that your website can be crawled very efficiently by Google and that the content can be very efficiently indexed by Google. So let's start by talking about the crawler, which is probably the most important part of technical SEO. We call that Googlebot, of course. This is the piece of software that Google has that spiders the web, tries to find new content or content that has changed since the last time that Google crawled it. Google starts by crawling web pages that it already knows exist. Or you can also submit new content to Google through XML sitemaps. And all that the crawler really does is find links. It just looks for links to crawl, old-fashioned Ahref link attributes in the HTML source code of a web page, and that those get added to the crawl queue. That's really all that Google actually does. It just crawls links. You have pretty strong control over what Googlebot is and is not allowed to see, because Google obeys your robots.txt directives. This is my own robots.txt file on my own website. And as you can see, I have a separate rule there for Google Ads bot. Pardon the bad language in that screenshot. It's just that Ads bot obeys different rules than standard user agents. So I have to have separate rules for Ads bot. But Googlebot as a crawler is what we call a polite crawler, which means it will obey your robots.txt disallow rules. By default, Google will assume it can crawl everything. So you have to tell Google when you do not want it to crawl certain parts of your website, which is where your robots.txt file comes in. Your disallow rules in robots.txt prevent crawling, but they do not prevent indexing. And that's a little bit of a strange thing to think about, because Google will see links pointing to web pages that it's not allowed to crawl. You can have a robots.txt disallow rule, like Google themselves have here on the jamboard.google.com subdomain, which Googlebot is not allowed to crawl, but you can still find Jamboard in Google search results because Google sees links pointing to Jamboard and will index those links. Google still sees those links, will index those links, and will also use the text, the anchor text of those links to understand what those pages may be about and what those pages can be ranked for. So Googlebot will still see links and therefore index those links, even though it can't see what's on those links if you have a robots.txt disallow. You see this reflected as well in Google Search Console. There's a report in Search Console that says indexed though blocked by robots.txt. This is this exact issue as reported in Search Console. So if you actually want Google to not index web pages, you need to use different mechanisms like the noindex meta tag. So robots.txt is purely for crawling. It does not help you for indexing. And vice versa, of course. You have things like canonical tags and noindex tags, which do not prevent crawling, but prevent indexing. Crawling and indexing are two different systems in Google. So canonical tags and no index tags can be very useful to prevent Google from indexing certain pages, to either with the no index prevent indexing entirely, or with the canonical tag, you can tell Google to just index one version of a web page. But Google will still need to crawl those pages and see those meta tags before it can act on them. So they do not help you with optimizing your crawling. They just help you optimizing your indexing. So there are two different systems there. Optimizing crawling has a lot to do with how fast your website responds. This is another report from Google Search Console, the crawl stats report, which is probably my favorite report, because it shows very clearly the relationship between how fast your website is and how fast Google crawls. In this case, you see exactly when the average response time, the orange bar, when it went up, which means the website got slower. And at the exact same time, the blue bar, which is the amount of crawl requests, basically how many pages Google crawls in a day, went down. So slow website means fewer crawl requests. And this is exactly what happened in this instance. We see that the website got slower and Google started crawling it a lot less. And the reverse is also true. If your website gets faster, Google will crawl more pages. So if the response time goes down, Google will crawl more pages per day. This is another screenshot that shows that on a daily basis, a very strong negative correlation between server response time and crawl requests. Every time the website is slow, Google crawls more pages, and when the website is fast, Google crawls fewer pages. This is a very interesting screenshot that was sent to me by someone else. This website obviously has some server problems, that one day it's fast and the other day it's slow. And this is reflected in how fast and slow Google crawls the website as well. So generally speaking, you want to make sure that your website is as fast as possible and that the average response time that Google has is as fast as possible. The question I often get asked is, what is fast enough? Google themselves say 600 millisecond response time is probably fast enough. I think that's probably a bit too slow. If you can go towards the 200 milliseconds, you're probably better off, but it's quite hard to do. That is difficult. It requires very smart developers, very good server infrastructure, some good cloud hosting as well. So it's not easy to do. Generally speaking, if you're 500 milliseconds or faster, you're probably okay, which is about half a second response time. So, and it depends, of course, on how fast you want Google to crawl. If you have a very big website with millions of pages, you will want your website to be as fast as possible because Google needs to do a lot of crawling. Whereas if you have like 100 pages or 1,000 pages on your website, the server response time doesn't really matter that much because Google can crawl everything in a few hours at most and won't have any problems finding every web page on your website. The other part of crawl stats in Google Search Console that I like a lot is this report. You see exactly what Googlebot is doing when it crawls your website, what kind of responses that it finds. This, by the way, is a very healthy crawl stats report where most of the responses are 200 OK, which is the correct server response time for a web page that Googlebot is allowed to crawl and is allowed to index. Most of the web pages are HTML pages. Refresh versus discovery. Refresh basically means Google will crawl web pages it already knows exist, and discovery is new web pages to find. That's also fairly healthy. And then most of the crawl requests come from Googlebot Smartphone, which is their mobile first crawler, which is how they crawl web pages in general. So this is a very healthy crawl stats report. For me, this is not something that has any issues at all. So if your crawl stats report looks similar to this, you're doing a good job. Sometimes you see some issues here that could point to problems that you need to fix. For example, if your web page has a very high degree of page resource load crawl requests from Googlebot, it basically means that Google has to crawl a lot of extra resources around web pages, like images, JavaScript files, CSS files, all those extra things that load a web page, which Googlebot also does when it renders web pages as part of indexing. We'll talk about that a bit later on. And if you have a very high percentage of page resource load requests in your crawl stats report, it basically means that your web pages are quite heavy. There's a lot of extra resources like JavaScript that needs to be loaded before the web page can be shown. and therefore that could prevent Google from indexing your website efficiently. So for me, this would be an action point to see what is actually the page weight, how many resources does this web page have, this website in general, and can we find any optimization there? Can we reduce the amount of JavaScript? Can we reduce the number of images? Things like that. Also, if you do paid advertising on Google, sometimes you see this, that AdsBot consumes a lot of crawl budget. AdsBot is what Googlebot uses to crawl your website when you have a specific type of Google Ads campaign, which is called dynamic search ads, which is or when Google will dynamically create advertising for you based on the web page it finds on your website. And to find those web pages on your website, Googlebot will crawl your website with the AdsBot user agent. And AdsBot is useful for these dynamic search ads, but it does not share information with Googlebot in the context of SEO, context of regular Google search, which is also why you have to have separate robots.txt disallow rules for AdsBot. So this is a problem because this consumes a lot of AdsBot crawl budget, and that means that regular Googlebot doesn't have a lot of crawl budget available. So that shows to me that the dynamic search campaigns are probably too broad and basically going a bit renegade and need to be more efficiently handled. Because this can have a very severe negative impact on how Googlebot, regular Googlebot, can crawl and index web pages on the website. You also always want to make sure that you serve the correct HTTP status codes. The ones that you should be using are 200 OK, of course, which is the status code for a web page or a page resource, like an image or a JavaScript file, that Googlebot is allowed to crawl and is allowed to index. Then you have the two types of redirects, the 301 and 302 redirects. 301, of course, are permanent redirects. The 302 are temporary redirects. Generally speaking, you want to use 301 redirects in nearly all cases. The 304 not modified is basically what Googlebot sometimes sees if you use a CDN, a content delivery network like Cloudflare, that keeps track of when Googlebot crawls web pages, and when it sees that Googlebot is trying to crawl a page that has not changed since the last time Googlebot crawled it, Cloudflare can just serve a 304 status code which says, hey, you don't have to crawl this again. It hasn't been modified since the last time. The 401 and 403 are basically password prompts where you have to log in to see the resources. 404 and 410 are when web pages don't exist. The 404 should be used when there was never a web page there, and a 410 should be used when you had a web page there but it was removed or deleted. In practice, it doesn't really matter if it's a 404 or a 410. Google treats them more or less the same. And then you have the 500 errors, which are generally best avoided because that means that your website is down and you don't want that to happen. Keep in mind when you optimize for crawling that all your web resources, not just your web pages, consume crawl budget. So all your images, all your JavaScript files, or your CSS files, which means you want to reduce the amount of HTTP requests per page. So you reduce the amount of page resources. Like I said, AdsBot can use crawl requests as well. So double check your Google Ads campaigns. Don't let them go rogue. Don't let them crawl everything. Keep your dynamic search ads campaigns quite tight and quite efficiently run. And it's important to realize that if you want to improve your crawl budget, your crawl effort on your web page, it helps to have more links pointing to your page. The amount of crawling that Google does on a website correlates very strongly with the amount of links that are pointing to that website. So if you have more links from external sites pointing to your site, Googlebot will crawl your website more often. So it helps to build more links to your website to improve crawling on your site as well. Next, we'll talk about the indexer, the indexing system. This is where a lot of the intelligence of Google goes in. This is where Google analyzes content, it analyzes links and how web pages link to one another. This is where Google also analyzes the layout of web pages. So it sees exactly what the usability of the web page is, where the header is, where the footer is, where the main body of content is. And again, you have control over this with robots meta tags like the noindex tag and the canonical tag that I mentioned before. Google has at least 2 stages of indexing, probably a lot more, but you know how Google talks about indexing is that they have first pass indexing based on HTML source, and second stage indexing is where they render web pages, where they turn HTML source into an actual web page, so that they get the full impression of what a web page looks like, and whether or not, you know, like I said, the web page is usable, also whether or not it's mobile friendly, how fast the web page loads, where the main body content sits, how prominent certain links are, like are these links very high value and are very likely to be clicked on, or are these links that are hidden in the footer of the web page and users are not likely to see them, because that also impacts on how much link value passes through those links. Google themselves show it that like this, that they have an initial crawler, then they process the web pages first based on HTML, and then they have also a rendering engine that then renders that web page as if it was a browser, and then sends it back to be processed and then build an index on. That rendering happens with a Chrome browser engine, which is usually more or less the latest version of Chrome that exists. So you don't have to worry too much about backwards compatibility issues. So whenever a web page is rendered in Google's indexing system, Google will use a Chrome browser to do that. So basically, if your web pages work fine in Chrome, it also means Google should not have a problem with indexing them. Search Console, again, can be a very useful source of information to find potential issues with rendering if your web pages cannot be rendered properly by Googlebot. Soft 404 errors can be a very strong indication that there's a rendering issue. A soft 404 is basically when Google thinks that the web page it's looking at is a 404 not found error message, but it doesn't have the 404 HTTP status code. It has a 200 OK status code. The 200 OK status code tells Google that this is a valid web page and therefore can be indexed. But then when Google indexes that page, it sees a not found error, or maybe it sees an empty page, in which case Google thinks it maybe should be a not found error page and reports that as a so-called 404, soft 404. That can be a problem with rendering, where the content of the page cannot be rendered by Google, and therefore Google thinks it's an empty page and shows that as a soft 404. This is especially important if you have a XML sitemap that has soft 404s in it, in which case you want to definitely investigate that issue and see why these pages are soft 404s. Also, page index without content, we sometimes see that in Search Console. That is definitely a rendering issue, because that should be a web page for Google to index, but Google can't find any content on that web page, and therefore there's probably an issue with that web page and how Googlebot sees that web page. Sometimes Google cannot load all the resources that are associated with the web page. There might be, for example, a subdomain or a folder where your JavaScript files or your images sit, and there is a robots.txt disallow that prevents Google from seeing those images or seeing those JavaScript files, in which case you have an issue with inaccessible resources, because Google needs to see all the resources that are available on a page so that it can see what the page is about. The only exception is advertising. Googlebot does not want to see advertising on a page, so it doesn't crawl advertising, so it doesn't trigger page views, ad impressions either. But if it's not advertising, Googlebot wants to see every part of the web page. So you have to make sure that all these page resources can be crawled and indexed by Google. Another issue you sometimes see is when there's JavaScript that breaks the header section of the web page, like an iframe, for example. Iframes should not exist in the header part of your HTML page. They only should exist in the body part of your HTML pages. This is actually something Google has now specifically created documentation about. They have a Search Central document in the advanced SEO section that says don't use invalid HTML tags in the head section of your HTML page. You should have these in the body section of your HTML page. Because sometimes if it's in the header section of the HTML page, Google thinks that the header has ended and the body has begun, and then it might not be able to process other header tags properly. Pardon me for drinking tea. I have a bit of a sore throat. I think I have a bit of a flu coming on, to be honest. So just before Christmas, great timing. There's a very handy plugin for Chrome but you can see the differences between the raw HTML source code and the fully rendered page. It's called the View Rendered Source plugin. I'm a big fan of it. I use it quite a lot. And it tells you exactly what the differences are in the HTML code from the original HTML source to the completely rendered version, which gives you a very good impression about what changes in the HTML source in the process of rendering. Ideally, of course, not a lot changes. There's always something that changes, but most of the time you want those changes to be fairly small or very focused, with maybe some JavaScript that is executed. But the main content of your web pages should ideally be present in the original HTML source, and also, of course, in the completely rendered version of your web page. And this View Rendered Source Chrome plugin will show that to you, will show you exactly what has changed. So it is a very useful plugin for analyzing technical SEO issues. When you use a Google tool like the mobile friendly test, the rich results test, or PageSpeed Insights, Google will always completely render your web pages. So the outcomes of these tools are always based on the completely rendered version of your website. Which also can be quite useful to see what the rendered version actually sees. And then you can compare that to the view source that you see in your browser, which you can just do by doing right click on a web page and clicking view source. That is the original HTML source that you see. And then, of course, Google in their tools will show you the completely indexed, completely rendered version of a web page. When it comes to optimizing for indexing, I'm a big fan of doing everything on the server and not rely on Google's rendering, because it makes life a lot easier for Google. And a lot of SEO is basically making things easier for Google. So use server-side rendering, use caching in the CDNs as well. Try to reduce the amount of resources required to load a page. Fewer JavaScript, fewer images, less styling. Just keep your web pages light and lean, which also helps with load speed and core web vitals, and also helps with crawling. It helps make your crawling more efficient. And lastly, your internal linking is also an important part of this. More page rank flowing through your web page to deeper pages also helps increase the chances that those pages will be properly indexed by Google. So good internal linking is also an important part of optimizing for indexing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the key technical SEO trends that are happening at the moment, and I think will be very important in 2023. The biggest one is what is called Edge SEO. And what do we mean by Edge SEO? Most websites nowadays use a content delivery network of some description, like Cloudflare, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, whatever it is. Most websites will be hosted through a CDN of some description, which means when a user loads your website in their browser, they're actually talking to the nearest CDN server where they are in the world. If you have a website that was originally hosted in Indonesia, but you use a CDN and an American user looks at your website, then the American user is probably not directly talking to your Indonesian server, but is talking to a web server in the CDN that is nearest to them, which can be like in California or in Texas or in New York, depending on where that CDN has different data servers. Which also is the case then for Google. When Google crawls your website, it will crawl the site that is most accessible to them, which is generally the ones that is hosted in the CDN nearest to where Googlebot is. Googlebot crawls 90% of the time from California, from Mountain View, California, Googlebot headquarters. So if you have a CDN like Cloudflare, which also has data servers, data centers in California, it can help get your website crawled a lot faster by Googlebot as well. Now, the really interesting things here is that when you change things on your web server, of course, then they get propagated through the cloud CDN, the cache is updated, and Googlebot will then also see those changes. But you can directly manipulate changes in the CDN without having to change your original website. There's a lot of features that allow this, like with Cloudflare, they're called cloud workers, which allow you to manipulate your web pages, to change your web pages in the cloud without changing your original website. So in a nutshell, CDNs store cached versions of your web pages all over the world in their data centers, which generally results in faster crawling and better core web vitals because it improves load speed for people all over the world. With Edge SEO, you can manipulate those cached pages directly in the cloud with cloud workers, and there's basically no limit to what you can change. You can do anything you want, and then Googlebot will see those changed pages. Your original website is still as it was, but in the cloud, you have a different version that you're showing to the world, including to Googlebot. Why would you want to do that? Because basically you're creating a mismatch between your original website and what Googlebot and the world sees. One reason why you can do this is you can sort of bypass your developers' queues. You can say, right, we're not waiting for developers to build this new functionality. Instead, we're just building it in the cloud ourselves and therefore making it a lot easier. It also helps that you don't have any constraints from your content management system. You often get told by your developer, oh, we can't do this because WordPress doesn't allow this to happen, or Shopify doesn't have this feature built in, so we can't do it. That is not a reason now anymore, because on the edge, in the cloud, basically, you can change anything about a website, whether or not the platform supports it or not. You can just change it. Which also allows you to do testing, like A/B split testing. You can say, for example, on an e-commerce website, we take one category and only just one category of products, and we make a specific change to those product pages and to those category pages. And the rest of the website we leave unchanged. And that allows you to see, right, for this category that we made the change, our rankings go up, our rankings go down, we get more traffic, less traffic, etc. And the rest of the website then serves as the baseline to see whether or not that was an improvement. There are specific tools now that allow you to do this. Search Pilot is probably one of the most known ones. There's also Rank Science and Split Signal, which also allow you to do this. It's basically SEO A/B testing, which is very, very useful because it basically allows you to test changes in very limited scenarios before you roll them out across the whole website to see whether or not they have a positive or negative impact on your rankings and on your traffic. Which has always been a challenge with SEO, where you make a change and you're not entirely sure whether or not it's going to work, if it's going to have more traffic or less traffic, more sales or less sales. And then with Edge SEO, A/B split testing for SEO, basically, you can just test it, change it out in limited categories before you roll them out live across the whole website. The folks at Search Pilot, this A/B testing platform, also have a very good newsletter, which I highly recommend you subscribe to, because they regularly share the tests that they've done for their clients and see what their outcomes are. This is one from May in this year, where they had a test. Do we fix our internal links to remove internal 301 redirects so that internal links point directly to final destination pages rather than going through a redirect? And does that help our SEO? The answer was yes, it helps our SEO. It makes our web pages rank better, makes them perform better. So that was a very useful test, and it allows you to build a business case for your developers to say, right, we need to do this on our website as well, because this is going to help our traffic. This is going to help our rankings in Google. So that is Edge SEO. Now, I can't not talk about AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages. AMP are basically web pages using a specific mobile-friendly framework that Google introduced back in 2015 to optimize for mobile user experience. I have fairly strong opinions on AMP. In fact, I am still #1 in Google, I think, for this particular search term. I've taken out the bad word, but if you Google that, you will probably see my article in the top 3 results. I am glad to say that AMP is on the retreat. Search Engine Land turned off AMP earlier this year, and they saw no drop in traffic. Future Publishing, which has websites like Tech Radar, PC Gamer, etc., they also turned off AMP, which saw no negative impact. Reuters, the very big news publishing agency, also turned off AMP, and in fact, I think they got an improvement on traffic. In August, Tribune Publishing, a very big American news publisher, turned off AMP on their different regional news websites like the Baltimore Sun. They saw no loss of traffic. New York Daily News, again, no loss of traffic. Chicago Tribune, also no loss of traffic. And most interestingly, Google stopped talking about AMP. There used to be a very elaborate section in their article structured data documentation for AMP pages, because AMP pages have slightly different requirements for article structured data or blog posting structured data than regular web pages. But Google has removed all of that. They removed any mention of AMP from their article documentation, which to me shows that Google has sort of given up on AMP. They're like, okay, we're not going to update the standard anymore. We're just going to let it do its thing and let it retire. So I think we can wave goodbye to AMP. Which makes me a very happy man indeed, because I am on the record as being very anti-AMP, shall we say. That in a nutshell is all that I have. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. I am not that active there anymore. Feel free to follow me on Mastodon. I am a lot more active there. And I have an open email policy, barry@polemicdigital.com, for any SEO related questions. And also someone earlier asked for LinkedIn. You can also add me on LinkedIn. I put that in the chat as well. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, let's hear it.
Okay, thank you very much for the explanation. It's quite heavy and technical, but I guess a lot of people have a question. So anybody who would like to just raise your hand or just put the question on the chat and I will read it to Barry, or you can also ask him directly. So anybody? Don't be shy.
Yeah, it usually takes people a few minutes to come up with a good question.
Okay. Okay, Puspasari, do you want to unmute and then ask directly? Puspano? Okay, I think she wrote. She was on a project to edit an AI generated news based on UK. Will it affect the SEO on future? And what do you think of the future content will be?
Oh yeah, I see the question in the chat. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really know what's going to happen. I think what you see with the AI generated content, some of it is really good and can be useful, especially for news websites that have a very specific niche. For example, sports news. If you have, like in America, for example, there's a lot of high school sports games happening, basketball games and American football games that have relatively high levels of interest. There might be hundreds of thousands of people who want to read about that sports game because high school sports is very, very big in the US. However, news organizations, even local and regional news publishers, don't necessarily have the money and the resources to hire journalists to go and attend those games and write up match reports. But the beauty of these sports, especially in America, is that there are a lot of statistics gathered about those sports games. There's always people that are taking notes. How many points does that player score? How many yards do they make? You know, at all those things. And what you can do with AI generated content, you can feed those numbers into an AI engine and it will generate a match report for you that will read as if someone was actually there. But it's just based purely on the numbers around that sports game. There wasn't actually an actual journalist there. It's just purely based on the statistics around that game. And because there's a pretty decent audience for that, you know, you can do that at scale and just basically have every single high school sports game have its own match report, and then people will read that and consume that content. Also with financial news, like stock markets go up and down, exchange rates change all the time. You can have AI generated content around that so that it very accurately and quickly reports on movements in the stock market, movements in the currency markets. But it's just based on the pure numbers. It's not actual any insight there. There's no analysis there. It's just purely based on the statistics and the numbers that are fed into the machine. And some news publishers do this on a very large scale already. When it comes to actual content, actual news and analysis and background content, I still think we need to rely on people there, because the AI systems like ChatGPT are based on historic data. I mean, even if you ask ChatGPT right now, what is the latest news, it will tell you it can't do that because the newest data it has in the system is from 2021. So at least a year, maybe even 2 years old. So it doesn't have anything more recent than that. ChatGPT doesn't know about the Ukraine invasion, for example, because that happened at the start of 2022. So news will always still be mainly written by journalists. It's more about the evergreen content that doesn't have a time shelf, that I'm a little bit worried about. Okay, will there still be value there for human writers, or can the machines just do that? But if it's newer content, I think people will still be the ones to generate that primarily, and we don't necessarily can rely on the AI systems to generate that content for us, except, like I said before, if it's for those very specific cases where you can feed numbers and statistics into the engine and it will generate a report for you. But like I said, there's no insight there, there's no analysis there. It's just purely factual reporting of the statistics. So yeah, it's very interesting, and I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen, but it'll be interesting to see, at least. And I don't think people have to worry about losing our jobs anytime soon.
Okay, so thank you for it. Puspita, do you have any follow-up question? Oh, sorry, Puspa. If it's no, then I will continue to Agastya. Agastya, do you want to unmute, or maybe to be way much more faster, I will read it. So he was asking your explanation about EMP. What is the best practice to do the EMP deletion, and maybe a less harm way for our website?
Yeah. When it comes to deleting AMP, you have to do it in stages. First and foremost, it's very important to look at your core web vitals in Google Search Console and make sure that the core web vitals for your regular, so your non-AMP pages, are entirely green, so that you have really good core web vital scores on your web pages before you think about deleting AMP. If your core web vitals are not good, the first step is make them good. Make your web pages load fast, make your core web vitals all green. Then when your core web vitals are green and your web pages are fast, then you can think about deleting AMP. The best way to do that is to probably just stop doing AMP for newer articles, because AMP is primarily for news publishers, so it's in the context of news, and you keep the AMP pages for your old articles in place for the time being, but you stop having AMP versions for your newer articles. And then see what happens to your traffic, and if that stays good, if your traffic stays high, then you can delete the old AMP versions and 3.1 redirect them to the regular versions of your articles. So basically a three-step approach. First, you improve your core web vitals, then you stop using AMP for newer articles, and then when that all goes good, then you delete the old AMP versions entirely and 3.1 redirect them to the new AMP version, to the regular version of your articles. And then from that moment, you just have one version of every web page on your website, and it's all good to go.
Okay. So, Agastya, is there any follow-up question? No. If there is any follow-up, no. Okay, thank you. And then from Rido, how to optimize SEO for single-page app website? That's the first question.
Yeah, let's start with that. A lot of my clients have single page apps, and it's perfectly fine as long as you still have URLs that are unique and are accessible and don't have the hashes, like the hash mark in there, because Google ignores everything after a hash in a URL. So your single page app needs to use old-fashioned Ahrefs links with full crawlable and accessible URLs in them. And if that's the case, then it basically behaves like a normal website as far as Google is concerned. So Google can crawl every individual URL on its own and see the content in that URL on its own. Ideally, with single page apps, you also want to do server-side rendering as much as possible so that the complete content is in the HTML that Googlebot sees. So Googlebot does not have to do any client-side rendering to see the content. And in that instance, then you're totally fine, because basically, again, your single page app will behave more or less like a normal website. So yeah, make sure every page has its own unique URL. Use old-fashioned Ahrefs links to internally link on your website, and don't rely on heavy client-side rendering and do most of the heavy lifting in the server. And then if you tick all those 3 boxes, you should be fine.
Okay, so there's a second question. Is it good for SEO if his website support more than one language?
I don't think there's a direct SEO benefit. It's more about your customers. Sorry? Yeah. What have I missed?
Can you explain?
Thanks, Barry, for explanation for question number 1. Number 2, for example, I have a content in Bahasa, and also I also have a content in English on the same topic. Yeah, is it good, or I better use maybe different domain, maybe, or I can use same domain? What is good for indexing Google?
I actually think it's better if it's the same country you're targeting to do everything on one domain and use href lang tags to tell Google, oh, we have 2 versions of this web page. One is in English, one is in the other language. Because on one domain, you also have one link value. All the links pointing to that domain help your SEO for both versions of those web pages. The exception is if you target different countries, because there's a very strong geo-targeting signal, which is the country-specific domain name. You know, .co.jp domain name is always assumed to target Japan. For example, .co.au is always assumed to target Australia. And that's a very strong geo-targeting signal. So if you're trying to target different countries, I would probably try to get a country-specific domain name for every country that you're targeting. But if it's one country or one area and multiple languages, then I would say do everything on one domain and use a href meta tags to indicate to Google you have multiple versions of every web page.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Barry, for explanation.
Okay, next from Denny. Denny, would you like to unmute?
Hello, Barry. When will the expertise in the new EAT be implemented, and what's your take on it?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I think probably the next algorithm update, because the expertise experience in EAT has only just been updated in the quality raters guidelines. So the quality raters are only just now starting to use that experience factor as part of EAT. So the Google still has to gather the data from these quality raters, which then goes into the next version of the core algorithm update. So it might be the next, it might even be the one after that. I think we will not see any impact on that until maybe March next year, could even be July next year, depending on when the next few core algorithm updates roll out. I think the main reason they're trying to do this is that because the original EAT was maybe a little bit too narrow and focused too much on people with like very high levels of expertise, like doctors and professors. And with the experience, Google is saying, okay, we allow more people from broader backgrounds to be experts in this particular field. So it's not just about doctors, maybe also about people who suffer from specific illnesses themselves, who are not medical, but have experience having that disease. Or in the context of SEO, it's people who maybe don't have big profiles in SEO, but are very good at one particular part of SEO. And then Google says, okay, we can trust these people as well. So I think it's an improvement. I think it makes it a bit easier to show expertise and experience, and for a bit easier for websites to get approval from Google. But I think it'll be like 1 or 2 core updates down the line before we see the impact of that.
Okay. Any further question, Danny?
I myself is also a search quality rater, and I haven't noticed any difference in my dashboard.
There you go. So we might not see any changes at all.
I see. Thank you. Very.
Okay, thank you, Denny. So next we have Juan. Juan, would you like to unmute?
I would like to ask, I did a website audit through PageSpeed Insight at one of my clients' website, and the result turns out that there is a recommendation about enable text compression. It is a new result that I get throughout this audit that I did. What's your take on this?
If you can, it's quite useful because it takes like an HTML file that is, say, 150 kilobytes, and with compression, it can turn that into 25 kilobytes. I mean, text compression is very powerful. You can make very big text files very small with text compression, and vice versa if you uncompress it. Generally, though, that's happened server side. It's a configuration where you tell the server, enable compression, and that's all you really need to do. And it makes the files a lot smaller. With some JavaScript files, for example, the complete JavaScript file can be 1 or 2 megabytes long, but with compression, you're down to maybe 200 kilobytes, which makes it a lot faster to send over the internet and a lot faster to load. So if you can enable compression, yes, by all means, do that.
Oh, so so this text compression took in the server side? Or
Usually, yes. Usually, it's something you have to enable on the web server, on the hosting of your website. It can be a simple tick box that says enable compression.
I see. Sure. So it has nothing to do with, let's say, the CMS or maybe the code of the website itself.
It's usually something that your hosting provider can help you with. They can tell you whether or not or how to enable compression. It's not something you do like in WordPress yourself, because that's not something WordPress itself handles. It's more the hosting of your website that has to handle that.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Juan. Any other question? Okay, Nata.
Kak, tolong dibantu ya.
Oke.
Aku mau nanya market behavior di sana tuh gimana gitu, apa namanya, di UK gitu kan, apakah mayoritas, kan dia negara maju, apakah mayoritas masih menggunakan search engine atau udah lumayan banyak juga ke distraksi untuk misalnya melakukan behavior pencarian terkait mungkin tren baru atau apa, itu udah lebih ke sosial media, misalnya TikTok, Instagram, atau Twitter. Itu sih, Kak.
Okay.
Thank you.
He would like to ask you in Europe, I mean in UK and surrounding, the current trend, is it already the behavior trend? Is it already switching that people now searching not only from search engine but also from social media? What do you think about it?
Yes, you see this a lot, and I see it myself a little bit as well. When I do a search for something that I know, like an instruction video exists of how to change the tire on my car, I skip Google and go directly to YouTube. Younger people do a lot of searches on TikTok nowadays about products that they're interested in buying because they get information from people who have used that product rather than go through Google. I think some of it is also that Google serves web pages that people aren't sure that they can trust. You know, like what is the best beard product, and you always get these commercial information there where you're like, is this real or is somebody getting paid to write this? Whereas if you go to social media, you get the information from people actually using this and giving you maybe a bit more of an authentic review of the product. So there is a bit of a change in behavior there. I am not worried as an SEO person because search is still the biggest discovery system that's there. And I think it actually makes Google better because Google is worried about this. Google's like, okay, what do we need to do to get people back onto Google? So they will now think about ways to incorporate that sort of information into their search results and make their search results better. So I don't see that as a big problem for SEO yet, but another 10 years, who knows, right? We might all be working for TikTok.
Okay. Nata?
Aman. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you, Nata.
Yeah. Thank you, Berry.
Yang lain, maybe ada yang mau tanya. Kalau malu bisa pakai bahasa Indonesia, nanti saya bantu translate. Okay, so Tommy asking, do you want to unmute Tommy? Tommy? Oke, aku bacain aja ya. So, he's trying to learn Blogspot for blogger. Do you have any advice to make it more powerful, compete with a WordPress or other CMS?
Yeah, and the follow-up question as well, if I buy a domain from Google, does Google recognize my link from xxx.blogspot.com? I'll be honest, I don't know. I've never actually had a play with Blogspot myself. I think it supports custom domains, but I'm not entirely sure. And it's been, I mean, the last time I looked at Blogspot was, I think, 10 years ago. So I honestly don't know. Maybe ask someone who has experience with that. I'm sorry, I genuinely don't know.
Okay, Mas Tommy. Okay, thank you. Tadi ada Agus mau tanya, di Agus ya?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Good evening. I don't know. Is it evening there, Barry? So
afternoon.
Yeah.
It's early afternoon.
Yeah. I just want to ask you about the trend of SEO, because as I know that this SEO things is dynamically change. I mean, the trend and everything. As in Google now is as I read some of the article that now their tendency is how to having the article or any user or visitor is seeking everything in the Google, so that the Google can provide any kind of things that the user wants. So mostly they are now tendency have like a friendly user. So what happened in the next 2 or 3 years? Is there any from your side, because you already a long time in this particular knowledge? So what would happen in the future for the SEO? I mean, is it getting broad, or any the range of the knowledge of the SEO getting specific, or how for the trend next year? Or
yeah, I see a trend that has probably started about 10 years ago and is only getting better, that there is a need for specific SEO skills in specific areas. 10 years ago, you could be an SEO and you could work on any website. Whereas now there's a demand for SEOs who just do e-commerce, or SEOs like me who just do news websites. And I think we're going to see more of that. I see an increasing demand for SEOs who are very good at video optimization to get videos ranking in Google, image optimization as well, local SEO who just do SEO for local businesses. And I think if you want to grow your career as an SEO, it helps to specialize, to become good at one part of SEO and try to really say, well, this is my expertise, this is my specialty, which can be local SEO, in which case you work with local businesses to get them ranking in Google Maps and things like that. It can be e-commerce SEO, where you talk about, right, how do we get product listings for your web page in Google, which is now also completely organic, which is great. We used to have to pay for that, but now that's organic as well. It can be with news publishers. I work in news publishers. There's not a lot of people who do SEO for news websites. So there's a big market, but a very small pool of SEOs, which is, good for me, but it also opens the market up for other people. If you have any experience with news websites, put that on your resume and say, right, can we use this as a service? Especially in different languages, because most of my clients are English language websites, obviously. But there's a big demand for news SEOs who work in other languages, because there's a lot of local news publishers all over the world. So I think that's where I see SEO heading, and it's already started, and we see this more and more. that it helps to be very specialized in one area of SEO, where there's a big market, but maybe not a lot of people who really specialize in that, because there's also slightly different tactics that you need. Like optimizing for e-commerce is very different than optimizing for news websites, and then that's very different from optimizing a local business that has maybe 5 stores in a specific city. So they require very different talents and very different skills. And I think if you can do that, if you have that skills, try to really maximize your expertise and maximize your own marketing and say, right, I want to be known as the video SEO person or the local SEO person. And I think that would really help your career in the long term.
Yeah, so that was first question, but second question, like you are the SEO publisher. Is there any difference? I mean, between your publisher and other SEO like e-commerce and everything in terms of objective? Because like what I know that the thing is that we are driving the traffic to the website, but our publisher is it implement some of the same tactic or strategy like searching keyword or how you define your objective on this?
Yeah, very good question. It's slightly different there because news gets different treatment in Google. If you search for news in regular Google, you see this article box. We call it top stories boxes in English. It's the top stories, the top news articles. In e-commerce SEO, for example, you publish a product or a category and you have to build SEO value in weeks and months to get it to rank.
Mm-hmm.
In news, you publish an article and you want that to rank within 5 minutes. So it's a very different dynamic. And you get one chance at ranking the article. So the optimization needs to be correct the moment you publish it. If you then change the article later after Google has already indexed it, you've lost your opportunity. Google is not going to see that because it ranks it once. It has a shelf life of maybe 24, 36 hours, and then it's out of the top stories box. So very different dynamic than, say, optimizing e-commerce, which is about building long-term value.
Yes.
So yeah, very different tactics. It's much more about building habits with news publishers so that the optimization is done correctly the moment they click publish, about very fast crawling and indexing of content, which is not the big issue for e-commerce, but a very big issue for news publishers. So it changes the rules of the game very, very much. So yeah, every niche has different demands and different specialties you need to develop.
All right, thank you very for your insight.
Thank you, Bli, Agus. Is there any follow-up question or other question from other member of this Zoom? If not, I have a question. So I have a client that posts a lot of content monthly, like around 300 contents roughly. And sometimes I do realize there is a problem with indexing. Some it's very fast, and the other it will take like either 2 weeks, 11 days to get indexed. So is there any suggestion, or should I change the sitemap, or how should I treat this case?
The best way to get content indexed very quickly is to link from it on the homepage on your website. Google crawls your homepage very often. In some of my news publishing clients, Google will crawl a homepage every 5 to 10 seconds to find new articles. So if you want Google to very quickly find an article and index it, link to it from the homepage. And keep it on the homepage for like half a day or 1 day, usually enough. If you don't have the capability of doing that, then it should be like 1 click away from the homepage. So homepage, a category, and then that category has all the new articles. That is also quite useful. If you do that and Google still can't index them quickly, then you might have a problem with the articles themselves, the content themselves, that maybe it's not properly formatted and optimized. But 9 times out of 10, it is because the content is too deep in the website. It's too many clicks away from the homepage. So the closer you can bring that up in the site structure to the homepage, the faster Google is going to index it. You have that, for example, with websites that post new jobs, like it's a job portal, or a used car website where you want Google to index new cars very quickly. The best way is to have a box on your homepage that says this is our newest content, the newest jobs, or the newest cars, or the newest houses, or whatever it is that you're publishing. And if a news website, of course, it's newest articles. And have that dedicated box on your homepage where Google will always find the newly published content very quickly. And usually that makes sure that they get indexed very quickly as well.
Got it. Thank you, Barry. Others, ada yang mau tanya? Sudah puas dengan materinya? Okay, seems like oh, there is.
Hey, Barry. Nice
Dave.
to meet you. I'm sorry.
Hey, Erwin.
Yes, I'm sorry to for late because I am something urgent in my office. Thank you very for Mr. Barry Adams. Thank you for the coming in my webinar. I'm very happy for your material today. Very thing.
Mas Erwin, ada follow up, ada yang tanya?
Siapa yang tanya?
Ada Denny mau ditanyakan.
Oh iya, sorry Denny. Okay, thank you.
This is a follow-up question from my previous question. Will this new EAT concept also affect on non-YMYL topics?
Probably. I'm not sure. I think initially we'll see the biggest impact on the your money, your life kind of content, because that's what it's intended for. But I think Google will start using those signals for other websites as well, because it's about finding patterns, recognizing patterns of content. And you see this as well with core algorithm updates, where Google rolls them out for a specific your money, your life issue that they see, but other non-your money, your life websites also get affected by it, because the machine learning systems that Google relies on recognize those patterns on all websites. So yeah, we'll probably see a bit of impact from there as well, beyond just your money, your life.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. So next we have also Eric. Wow, when I said almost closing, they starting jump question, yeah, interesting. So Eric, would you like to unmute? Okay, I guess no. So what the skill do we have to be a news SEO specialist?
Nothing beats hands-on experience. Working with a local news publisher is how I started. I worked here at the Belfast Telegraph for a year, doing SEO for their news website. And because I knew a lot of classic SEO, I did not know news SEO when I got that job. I don't know why they hired me. I think I was lucky. Maybe they couldn't find anybody else. But it taught me a lot about news SEO. It's a very different beast. It's about editorial workflows. It's about technical SEO. You need very good skills with content and very good skills with technical SEO. The beauty, I think, of working with news publishers is that there's usually two challenges that you have in SEO, which is content and links, and those are the ones you don't have with news clients, because they generate a lot of content and they generate a lot of links to that content. So it's more about making sure you build really good editorial workflows so that the content that is published is optimized when it's published, and about technical SEO skills so Google can crawl and index the content very quickly.
Okay, Eric, any follow-up question? Okay, I guess no. So we continue with Nabila. Could you give me the best practice to get fast crawling in case of the site migration?
Oh yeah, that's always a tough one. It depends on how you do the site migration. If it's a complete site move from one domain to another, there's a change of address tool in Google Search Console. You can tell Google, oh, we're changing domain names. That is generally a good idea. And then of course you have 3-1 redirects from one to one, from the old URL to the new URL. But it only works if you do a complete site migration from one domain name to another. If it's on the same site, so you don't change domain name, but you change all the URLs, you have to work hard at it. You have to make sure every URL is 301 redirected. Ideally, you don't change URLs if you can. Keep the URLs the same, but that's sometimes a bit of a challenge. If you have to change URLs, always do 1-to-1 301 redirects from the old URL to the new URL. I like to have a sitemap, an XML sitemap that lists all the old URLs. And keep that in Google Search Console. So you see exactly in Google when the index level starts to drop off and when the new sitemap index level starts to increase. So you see exactly when Google is switching from one old URL to the new URL. So you have the old URLs in a sitemap and the new URLs in a sitemap. And beyond that, you sort of have to just hope and pray for the best, because site migrations are always very challenging. And generally speaking, something always goes wrong. It's very hard to do a site migration where you don't lose traffic. But yeah, it's probably my least favorite part of doing SEO, site migrations, because everyone is always disappointed no matter how good a job you do. So it's not easy.
Right. Nabila, any follow-up question? Okay, no. Okay, from Alpha Tan, he has some question about Google Discover. Is there a way to optimize the article so it will appear in Google Discover?
Yeah, always a tough one. There's no guarantee that an article will be picked up in Google Discover, but there are some things you can do to help. First, high resolution image, 1200 pixels wide, in a 16:9 aspect ratio, so that's 1200 wide by 675 pixels high, so that Google can use it as the banner image when the article is shown in Discover. Second, really good headline. Make sure that the headline describes what the article is about, because Discover is all about people's interests, what they're interested in. So you have to make sure that the topic they're interested in is listed in the headline. And third, what I see work really well is if you have a really good introduction paragraph for your content that sort of summarizes the content a little bit and maybe talks about related interests. The example I always give is you write an article about the Volkswagen car brand. So for Discover, people would see that if they're interested in Volkswagens and interested in cars. But someone who's interested in BMW might not see that. However, if then in the introduction paragraph, you mention competing car brands, so the headline is about Volkswagen, but in the introduction, you also mention BMW and Mercedes and Volvo, then suddenly that article will be shown for people who have BMW as an interest, or Volvo as an interest, or Mercedes as an interest. So you broaden the scope of that article's visibility in Discover. So for example, you write an article about a politician, also mention other politicians and maybe the party of that politician in the introduction paragraph as well. So you show more interest, more entities basically, so that Google can show that article to people across the whole spectrum of interests. And beyond that, it's about consistently publishing articles, put content out there regularly, because that helps you Discover as well.
Okay. So, Fatan, okay? Okay, thank you. Last chance, anybody would like to ask before I close this webinar? We've been talking a lot in around 1 hour. Okay, so Mas Erwin, any statement? Ada yang mau disampaikan?
No, it's okay already. Thank you once again. Thank you, Beri Adam, to coming for webinar.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed this. I like talking about SEO, so this is always fun. And we got really good questions as well from everybody, which is great. So yeah, I enjoyed this, and I hope you found it useful and worthwhile.
Okay, thank you. Because Indonesia SEO is, I think, is new. This new, no many course lah, apa ya bahasa itunya SEO?
Gimana?
Nggak ada source, no many source, good source for the SEO. So I invite you.
Many source like speakers.
Yes.
About SEO in Indonesia.
Indonesia SEO is new.
Okay.
Yeah, so why don't you create your own SEO for Indonesia news website? and start publishing content there regularly. You know, if it's a new market, go and own it.
Okay.
Yes, actually, I think Mas Erwin already worked in one of news publisher in
Yes.
Indonesia.
Yes, in compara.com.
Okay. Okay. So thank you so much, Barry, for tonight, and also thank you for everybody who already joined us from beginning to the end. If you got confused with all the explanation, don't worry, we have the recording and we will send it to you after this event. So once again, let's just open your camera and say thank you to Barry. Okay, you can unmute and say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
Okay,
Happy holidays, sir.
Before we
Okay, Merry Christmas
leave,
also.
we would
Merry
like
Christmas. Oh yeah.
take a picture. Oh yes. Okay, before we leave, I would like to take a pictures with all together. So please open your camera. So first screen. Okay. Okay. And then the second screen. Oh, wait a second. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you so much for tonight. And I guess you can contact Barry in his Twitter, email, and also LinkedIn. And yeah, once again, thank you all for joining. So we will close this webinar and yeah, see you again in next webinar. Okay, bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye,
Appreciate
bye.
you staying
Thank
on.
you,
Take your
thank
evening.
you.
Thank you, Mas Erwin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Erwin. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to go have my lunch.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's evening over there, so good night, everybody.
Hey, good night.
And thank you, Arvid, for
Thank
having me.
you,
Thank you,
Barry Adams.
Cecilia, for hosting. Very well done.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. See you.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Very welcome.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
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 This is
Bentar, Mas.
ini remove aja.
Oke.
Oke. Udah matiin recordnya, recordnya matiin.
Oh iya.